Mere decades later, humans did fly and accomplished many other astonishing things. A few iconoclastic dragonologists began arguing for a new attack on the dragon tyrant. Killing the dragon would not be easy, they said, but if some material could be invented that was harder than the dragon's armor, and if this material could be fashioned into some kind of projectile, then maybe the feat would be possible. At first, the dragonologist ideas were rejected by their dragonologist peers on grounds that no known material was harder than dragon scales. But after working on the problem for many years, one of the iconoclasts succeeded in demonstrating that a dragon scale could be pierced by an object made of a certain composite material. Many dragonologists who had previously been skeptical now joined the iconoclasts. Engineers calculated that a huge projectile could be made of this material and launched with a sufficient force to penetrate the dragon's armor. However, the manufacture of the needed quantity of the composite material would be expensive. A group of several eminent engineers and dragonologists sent a petition to the king asking for funding to build the anti-dragon projectile. At the time when the petition was sent, the king was preoccupied with leading his army into a war against a tiger. The tiger had killed a farmer and subsequently disappeared into the jungle. There was widespread fear in the countryside that the tiger might come out and strike again. The king had the jungle surrounded and ordered his troops to begin slashing their way through it. At the conclusion of the campaign, the king could announce that all 163 tigers in the jungle, including presumably the murderous one, had been hunted down and killed. During the tumult of the war, however, the petition had been lost or forgotten. The petitioners therefore sent another appeal. This time they received a reply from one of the king's secretaries, saying that the king would consider their request after he was done reviewing the annual dragon administration budget. This year's budget was the largest to date and included funding for a new railway track to the mountain. A second track was deemed necessary as the original track could no longer support the increasing traffic. The tribute demanded by the dragon tyrant had increased to 100,000 human beings, to be delivered to the foot of the mountain every evening at the onset of dark. When the budget was finally approved, however, reports were coming in from a remote part of the country that the village was suffering from a rattlesnake infestation. The king had to leave urgently to mobilize his army and ride off to defeat this new threat. The anti-dragonist's appeal was filed away in a dusty cabinet in the castle basement. The anti-dragonists met again to decide what was to be done. The debate was animated and continued long into the night. It was almost daybreak when they finally resolved to take the matter to the people. Over the following weeks, they traveled around the country, gave public lectures, and explained their proposal to anyone who would listen. At first, people were skeptical. They had been taught in school that the dragon tyrant was invincible and that the sacrifices it demanded had to be accepted as a fact of life. Yet when they learned about the new composite material and about the design for the projectile, many became intrigued. In increasing numbers, citizens flocked to the anti-dragonist lectures. Activists started organizing public rallies in support of the proposal. When the king read about these meetings in the newspaper, he summoned his advisors and asked them what they thought about it. They informed him about the petitions that had been sent, but told him that the anti-dragonists were troublemakers whose teachings were causing public unrest. It was much better for the social order, they said, that people accepted the inevitability of the dragon tyrant tribute. The dragon administration provided many jobs that would be lost if the dragon was slaughtered. There was no known social good coming from the conquest of the dragon. In any case, the king's coffers were currently nearly empty after the 2 military campaigns and the funding set aside for the second railway line. The king, who was at the time enjoying great popularity for having vanquished the rattlesnake infestation, listened to his advisor's argument, but worried that he might lose some of his popular support if he was seen to ignore the anti-dragonist petition. He therefore decided to hold an open hearing. Leading dragonologists, ministers of the state, and interested members of the public were invited to attend. The meeting took place on the darkest day of the year, just before the Christmas holidays, in the largest hall of the royal castle. The hall was packed to the last seat, and people were crowding in the aisles. The mood was charged with an earnest intensity normally reserved for pivotal wartime sessions. After the king had welcomed everybody, he gave the floor to the leading scientist behind the anti-dragonist proposal, a woman with a serious, almost stern expression on her face. She proceeded to explain in clear language how the proposed device would work and how the requisite amount of the composite material could be manufactured. Given the requested amount of funding, it should be possible to complete the work in 15 to 20 years. With an even greater amount of funding, it might be possible to do it in as little as 12 years. However, there could be no absolute guarantee that it would work. The crowd followed her presentation intently. Next to speak was the king's chief advisor for morality, a man with a booming voice that easily filled the auditorium.
Let us grant that this woman is correct about the science and the project is technologically possible, although I don't think that has actually been proven. Now she desires that we get rid of the dragon. Presumably she thinks she has a right not to be chewed up by the dragon. How willful and presumptuous! The finitude of human life is a blessing for every individual, whether he knows it or not. Getting rid of the dragon, which might seem like such a convenient thing to do, would undermine our human dignity. The preoccupation with killing the dragon will deflect us from realizing more fully the aspirations to which our lives naturally point, from living well rather than merely staying alive. It is debasing, yes, debasing, for a person to want to continue his or her mediocre life for as long as possible without worrying about some of the higher questions about what life is to be used for. But I tell you, the nature of the dragon is to eat humans, and our own species-specified nature is truly and nobly fulfilled only by getting eaten by it.
The audience listened respectfully to this highly decorated speaker. The phrases were so eloquent, and it was hard to resist the feeling that some deep thoughts must lurk behind them, although nobody could quite grasp what they were. Surely words coming from such a distinguished appointee of the king must have profound substance. The speaker next in line was a spiritual sage, who was widely respected for his kindness and gentleness, as well as for his devotion. As he strode to the podium, a small boy yelled out from the audience, "The dragon is bad!" The boy's parents turned bright red and began hushing and scolding the child, but the sage said, "Let the boy speak. He is probably wiser than an old fool like me." At first, the boy was too scared and confused to move, but when he saw the genuinely friendly smile of the sage's face and the outstretched hand, he obediently took it and followed the sage up to the podium. "Now there's a brave little man," said the sage. "Are you afraid of the dragon?" "I want my granny back," said the boy. "Did the dragon take your granny away?" "Yes," the boy said, tears welling up in his large, frightened eyes. "Granny promised that she would teach me how to bake gingerbread cookies for Christmas. She said that we would make these little houses out of gingerbread and little gingerbread men that would live in it, and then those people in white clothes came and took Granny away to the dragon. The dragon is bad and it eats people. I want my granny back." At this point the child was crying so hard that the sage had to return him to his parents.